In this lesson, we're going to be converting from fractions to decimals and decimals into fractions. And one thing that we're going to want to review to help make this process easy is our place value chart. And I've already filled in my place value chart. You may want to pause the video and go ahead and fill in your copy on your notes. And one thing that we're going to want to do here, make sure you bold that dot right there. That number is going to represent our decimal point. Okay, all whole numbers are going to be to the left of your decimal point. So that's your ones place, your tens place, your hundreds place, etc. To the right of our decimal point, these are going to be our decimal place values. And so if we go one place value to the right, that's going to be called the tenths place. 2 place values to the right is the hundredths place. 3 place values to the right of the decimal is the thousandths place. 4 place values to the right of the decimal is the 10,000ths place. 5 decimal values to the right of the decimal point is called the 100,000ths place. And then 6 place values to the right of the decimal is called the millionths place. So go ahead and fill that in on your copy. Now that we've reviewed our place value chart, we're going to answer our first question here, which is, how do you change a fraction to a decimal? And there are 3 different cases that we're going to look at. The first in part A is probably the easiest. That's when your denominator indicates a place value. If you look at all of the denominators of these 4 numbers here, those numbers are place value. That's 8 tenths. Tenths is a place value. 58 thousandths, 31 hundredths, 3 tenths. All of those denominators indicate a place value. And so all we need to do, okay, since this is the number 8 tenths, remembering up above, tenths was 1 place value to the right of our decimal, I'm going to put 0 and then my decimal point, and then this first place value is the tenths place, so I'm just going to put an 8 in that spot, and there's my decimal 8 tenths. My second number, 58 thousandths, okay, again, thousandths is one of my place values, and looking up at your place value chart, you can see that's 3 decimal place values to the right. So I'm going to start by putting a 0 decimal, okay? And if I just put 5, 8 like this, that's only 2 place values to the right of the decimal point. 2 place values is called hundredths. This is the number 58 hundredths, which is not 58 thousandths. That's a common mistake. So what we would instead have, okay, we're going to have 3 decimal place values. So in my tenths place, I'm going to put a 0 and then put my 58. And I can see 1, 2, 3 place values to the right. This is how we show 58 thousandths. My next number is 31 hundredths. Hundredths, again, is 2 decimal place values to the right of the decimal point. So I'm going to start by putting my 0 in my decimal. And then if I put 31 like that, that's 2 place values. There's my number 31 hundredths. My last number is 3 tenths. So again, I'm going to have my 0 decimal. Tenths is the first place value to the right of the decimal point, so I'm just going to put my 3, and there's how you would write the number 3 tenths. The second way that we're going to look and see how we can change a fraction into a decimal is if your denominator will multiply to a place value. If I look at this first number here, 8 25ths, well, 25ths isn't a place value, but I can easily change that into a place value. 25, we can multiply by some number to make a 100. In fact, if we did 25 times 4, 25 times 4 is going to equal 100, and hundredths is one of my decimal place values. Since I multiplied my denominator by 4, I'm going to do the same thing to my numerator, because these have to be equivalent to each other. 8 times 4 is going to equal 32. And so this is just the number 32 hundredths, which again I can write as 0.32, hundredths being 2 decimal places to the right of the decimal point. In the second example, it's 35 fiftieths. Again, 50 isn't a decimal place value, but I could easily multiply 50 by a number to make a place value. 50, if I were to take that and multiply 50 by 2, that's going to equal, again, 100. Hundredths is a place value. I'll do the same thing to my numerator now, 35 times 2, and that's going to give me the number 70. And so this is 70 hundredths, which I can write as 0.70. Okay, again, 2 decimal place values to the right is called hundredths. 4/5 is my next fraction. Okay, fifths is not a decimal place value, but again, I can multiply that into a decimal place value. If I do 5 times 2, for example, 5 times 2 is 10, and tenths is one of my place values. Now I'll do the same thing to my numerator. 4 times 2, I get 8, and so I have to make 8 tenths into a decimal, which again is 0.8. All right, tenths place being 1 to the right of the decimal point. I encourage you to try that for 3/4, 7/20, and 72 125ths. The third case that we need to investigate is when your denominator isn't a place value and it can't multiply to a place value. And so in this example, I've got a denominator of 9. Ninths isn't a place value, and I can't multiply 9 by some number to create a place value. And so when this happens, I'm simply going to divide. And so this is the number 5/9, and it means 5 divided by 9. That's what this fraction indicates. And so what I'm going to do is set up my long division. My numerator 5 is the number that has to go inside. So I'm going to put my 5 inside. And the denominator 9, the number that we're dividing by, has to stay outside. And so this is what 5 divided by 9 will look like. Okay, and so if we think about that, well, 9 goes into 5 0 times. Okay, so we've got to think, okay, well, then what can we do to make this division happen? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my decimal point for the number 5 right there, and I'm going to bring that decimal point straight up into my answer, and then on the inside, I'm going to add a 0. So this is still the number 5, but what I'm going to do is ignore the decimal point and think of this as the number 50. 9 goes into 50 5 times. And so 9 times 5 is 45. When I do the subtraction, 50 minus 45, I get 5. And I'm going to add a 0 inside, and I'm going to bring it down. So again, I have a 50. 9 goes into 50 5 times. And again, 9 times 5 is 45. I do the subtraction. I end up with 5 again. I'll add another 0 inside and bring that straight down. And you'll notice once again that I've got the number 50. Okay, so again, 9 goes into 55 times. 9 times 5 is 45, and we already know what's going to happen here. We're left with 5 again. If we added another 0, there's going to be our 50. So this is just going to keep repeating in this pattern forever. And so the way that we're going to write this, 5 divided by 9 equals 0 decimal. And what we're going to do, we're going to write down the number where it starts to repeat. It starts to repeat after this 5 tenths. Okay, right here after this 5 tenths, it's going to repeat 5s forever. And so we're going to write down just 5 tenths, and then to show that it's repeating, we're going to put a little bar over the top of that 5. And that indicates that 5/9 is equal to the decimal 5 tenths repeated. Okay, I'm going to do 5/8 as well to show you how we would do the long division here. I'm going to set up the division box. And 8, remember, or 5 rather, is your numerator, which is going to go inside. 8, your denominator, is going to stay outside. 8 goes into 5 0 times. I'm then going to put my decimal point and bring it straight up into the answer, and then add a 0 inside. Think of this as the number 50. 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. We subtract, and we end up with 2. Let's add a 0 and bring that down. Okay, 8 now goes into 20 twice. 8 times 2 is 16. I subtract, and that gives me a 4, so it's still not a 0 remainder. I'm going to add a 0 and bring that down. And now I've got to think 8 into 40. Well, 8 goes into 40 5 times exactly. 8 times 5 is 40. And there's my 0 remainder, and so I'm done. And so this is going to be my answer. 5/8 is equal to 0.625, which is pronounced as 625 thousandths. Now we're ready to change a decimal into a fraction, and this process is a little bit easier than what we were just doing when we changed fractions into decimals. The big hint right here, if you look at the hint, it says, if you can say it, you can write it. That's why it's important to know how to properly say these decimals. I don't want to call that 0.218 or 218, but I want to know the proper way to say this. And again, there are 3 decimal places to the right of the decimal point, and so I know that's going to be thousandths, and this is the number 218. So the way that we say this decimal is 218 thousandths. If I can say it, then I can write it. I'm going to write it exactly the way that I just said it. 218 over 1,000. There it is, 218 thousandths. I said it, I wrote it, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to see if I can simplify this, and in fact I can. I see that both of these numbers are even, and so I'm going to divide them both by 2. So I'm going to start by doing 1,000 divided by 2. That's going to give me 500. And then I'll do the same thing up here in my numerator, 218 divided by 2. And that's going to give me 109. I'm then going to check these numbers and see if I can keep simplifying. In this case, though, I can't. So the simplified version is going to be 109 500ths. In part B, this is the number 3 and 16 hundredths. 2 decimal place values is called hundredths. Since I said it, I'm going to write it. 3 and 16 hundredths. There's what it would look like as a fraction. Now that I've wrote it, though, I want to see if I can simplify the fractional part. 16 100ths. That number actually will simplify. Okay, they're both even numbers, so I can divide them by 2. All right, if I do 16 divided by 2, that gets me to 8. 100 divided by 2 is 50. But I realize that these are both still divisible by 2, so I'm going to divide them by 2 again. Divide each the numerator and the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 50 divided by 2 is 25. And I can't simplify any further. 4 and 25 don't have any other common factors besides 1. And so if I have my 3 and 16 hundredths, I'll write it over here so I can see it a little clearer. 3 and 16 over 100, that's going to simplify down to 3 and 4 25ths. And so that's the key here when you change a decimal into a fraction. If you can say it, then you can write it, and then all you have to do is simplify.